what's up, you guys? Welcome to REgroups. I hope you are having an awesome night. And if you've been here for the past 2 weeks, you know that we've been in this series called Bestseller. And we've kind of talked about a few different aspects of the Bible and of Scripture. And we talked about it in two different ways. We talked about how when it comes to the Bible, context makes things clear. Basically meaning that whenever we go to Scripture, it's important to look at what was going on at that time and who wrote it and why they wrote it and who they were writing it to and kind of how studying it can bring much more depth to it. The other thing that we talked about is how Scripture brings light to our path. And I talked a lot about how it's not ideal to go to Scripture in crisis, but to rather stay in it, and how when we stay in it on a consistent basis, when things are okay, when things are bad, that it lights up our path and helps us make better decisions. And I kind of want to correct something I said last week, because I talked a lot about how we shouldn't go to Scripture in a time of crisis. And what I meant by that isn't that you should not go to Scripture in a time of crisis. That can actually be a really good thing. Sometimes it's really important to go to Scripture whenever life isn't going well. But what I meant by that is that we shouldn't only go to it in a time of crisis. How we should stay in it consistently and not just run to it whenever we have a problem. Scripture is a great place to go whenever you're having a rough time or whenever something really bad happens. But it's also really important to stay with it on a consistent basis. So, this week, in light of the past 2 weeks, what we talked about, what we learned, we thought it would be cool to actually take the stuff that we talked about and take it to Scripture. So we looked at a few different books, we checked some stuff out, and we decided, we eventually landed on James. We landed on James, and James is an awesome book because it has a lot of really valuable, kind of straightforward teaching. It doesn't leave a lot up for questioning, even for like the modern day reader. Whenever you read it, it doesn't feel like this like confusing, baffling thing, but it's actually a really, really straightforward book. He talks a lot about faith. He talks a lot about our actions. And a lot of it sounds really great even without going into the context. But whenever you do, it makes it that much more interesting. Most scholars think that James, the guy who wrote James, was the half-brother of Jesus, right? He wrote it around 50 AD, so about 20 years after Jesus was crucified. And he wrote it primarily to Jewish Christians and really encourage them to live boldly. What he was talking about was instead of kind of being in a shell over here, is to step out in faith and live boldly. And sometimes it really sounds like some of Paul's letters, like Ephesians or Galatians, or these things where he has a lot of admonishments and encouragements and you need to do this or you need to do that. But other times it also reads a lot more like Proverbs, like some really just kind of down to earth advice. And the reason why it's so interesting that the half-brother of Jesus wrote this is because there's something that we know about him. Whenever you go to the Gospels, you can see several times where James and Jesus' brothers are like, Jesus, you are nuts. Like, you got to think about the fact that they grew up with Jesus. And all of a sudden, Jesus starts saying that he's God. Holy cow, right? Like, it's such a believable story that James and his brothers thought Jesus was crazy because they knew him. Like, they knew him as their brother, not as this Messiah or as this God. And there's a few times in Scripture where they come drag him out of places and they're like, Jesus, you need to go home because you're crazy, right? And this makes it so relatable and so believable because I think about like my relationship with my sister and how she was growing up. Like I probably my favorite video of me and my sister growing up, we were, I think it was like a hot summer day and I was a fat baby. Like I was just kind of chubby. And we had like one of those plastic little pools and I was sitting in this plastic pool, fat, chubby, and naked as a baby, just like chilling. And my sister comes up with a hose and she sprays me in the face with it and whacks me over the head with it. And I just immediately start crying. And it just made me think about like the relationship between siblings and how that must have been for James growing up with Jesus, how difficult it must have been. But then something happens, right? We see James' perspective shift. And what shifted his perspective was the ultimate crucifixion and then the resurrection of his brother. So what happened was Jesus died. Jesus died in front of him and then came back. And whenever he came back, James knew something was up. He stopped thinking he was crazy. He stopped doubting. He stopped doing all these things and he said, whoa, there must be something about him because I saw him die and now I'm seeing him alive. And another cool thing about this is the way, knowing that James struggled with believing Jesus was who he said he was. It makes it so much more interesting that what James talks about is faith. Have you all ever been in a situation where like you really, really want something to happen? Whether that's like, I don't know if you've ever been driving somewhere and like the gas light comes on and you're like, God, please just get me to the next gas station. We're going to make it, right? And like you really, really want something to happen, or maybe it's for this boy or this girl to like you or whatever, or maybe it's for your parents to let you go on a trip with some friends, or maybe it's something a lot more serious than that. Regardless of what it is, we all know truth about that. Like if I'm driving and I'm trying to make it to the next gas station and I start saying stuff like, oh, we're going to run out of gas, it's all over. Some people might say, dude, you can't even say stuff like that. Don't even think like that, right? But the truth is that there's a reality that we have to deal with. The reality is that my gas tank is empty, and what I say or think really doesn't matter. Our thoughts don't make a difference, right, whenever it comes to the actual outcomes. And if I just don't think about running out of gas, it doesn't mean that I won't, right? My gas tank is a reality that I have to deal with, that I have to face. And sometimes it's really easy to have the same mindset whenever it comes to faith. If I start to doubt about God, or I start to think something bad about God, or have questions about God, I think, oh, I just need to believe. I can't have any questions. I got to shove these doubts to the side. And if we have questions or doubts, we shut it down as something bad or something incorrect or something that we shouldn't be thinking. And I think James asks some stuff in this book that says, hey, is that really true? And we're going to go to James chapter 1, verses 2 through 4. And James says something about trials that we go through that may produce doubts. He says stuff about the difficult stuff that happens in life. And he says this. He says to... sorry, you guys, I'm kind of sick. He says, count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds, and sisters, when you meet trials of various kinds. For you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. And let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. See, whenever it comes to tough stuff, the stuff that maybe makes us question God. I don't know if you guys have ever been through things that makes you feel like God, are you really there? Are you really present? Do you really even care about me? James says something about it. He says what? He says to count it as joy. See, James knew what it was like to question God. James knew what it was like to hear Jesus and see him face to face and question if he really was who he said it was. He grew up with Jesus and he spent every second confused, doubting, and questioning. However, he knew that in the end, God wasn't like, sorry, James, you doubted me the whole time I was there. Sorry, James, you were wrong, right? But God honored it. God honored it. God said, you know what? I'm here. I'm real. I'm present, right? And he didn't get angry about his questions, but rather his questions and his struggle made his faith that much more powerful. And we saw James go from this doubter to one of the most powerful people that developed the early church. And the truth is that whenever our faith is tested, God is faithful. Whenever stuff happens in life that makes us question whether or not God is there, God is faithful. He prevails. So our questioning, our doubts end up not undermining our faith, not destroying it, but actually reinforcing it, because we question and we doubt, and then God shows up, even whenever sometimes it feels like he doesn't. So when you're going through something that's tough, or you have questions, or you have doubts, I want to encourage you to do a few things with them. Number one, take them to God. Don't be afraid to have like those real honest prayers with God of saying, God, like, I don't know if you're present in this right now. I don't know if I even believe you right now, but if you are there, I'm really mad, right? Whatever that looks like, don't be afraid to have those honest, real prayers with God. He's not afraid of your honesty. He's not afraid of your questions, right? And in fact, he wants us to come to him with them. The other thing is to take it to community. Be open and honest with other followers of Christ. Say, hey, here's how I'm feeling. Here's what's going on in my life. That's why we have small group, right? Is so that we can do stuff like that. So we can bounce off our questions and our doubts and what's going on in our life. And sometimes there's nothing more helpful than sitting down and talking to another believer about what's going on in your life. And the third one is don't go in with expectations. Don't go in thinking, oh, if I really trust God, he's going to do this. Know that sometimes the way out of difficult stuff, the way out of doubt, the way out of challenges in life isn't always what we expected. It's not always like the answer that you were looking for. And sometimes God has a greater plan. And that's the other thing, is to trust that no matter what happens, God has got you. No matter what your life looks like right now, no matter what you're going through, no matter what the trials are like, what the struggles are like, trust that God has something greater. And I know sometimes that's easier said than done, but whenever we can hold on to that truth, it will carry you through the difficult times. So whenever you head out to small groups, I want to encourage you to talk about a few things. Check out James 1, read it together, see what stands out. See what's in there that you really need to talk to. And also tonight is a great time to get real with each other. Like, what are the struggles that you're going through? What are the doubts that you have? What are the trials in your life right now? What are your questions? Be real with your small group about this stuff. It shouldn't be something that you're embarrassed to have, but something that you know God is going to honor. So I hope you guys have awesome small groups, and we will see you next week in houses.